Hey everybody, this is Marshall Townsend. Welcome to the Growing Leadership Blog. Today, we're continuing the journey into the culture of MT2 leadership by taking the name and the definitions for each of the letters and explaining them and what they mean to me. Today, we're on to the letter E, which stands for exceed expectation. And this is something that I'm very passionate about because it goes back to my time in the military and what I learned as a young officer. Now, I want to share with you a story today, and it might be a little bit long, but please stay with me with this because this is kind of critical to understanding who I am and where I come from. We're going to set the stage. 1985, 1986, I just returned back from 4 years in Germany, and I've been reassigned to Fort Knox, Kentucky as a 10-day war instructor. And yes, Fort Knox, Kentucky is the place where 007 and Goldfinger fought at the Gold Vault. It sits right there on Fort Knox. But at that time, Fort Knox was also the home of armor, and it was the armor school. So any new lieutenant going into the Army that was an armor officer was sent to Fort Knox for like 9 to 12 weeks for armor officer basics. And in the last 10 days of that, they attended a thing called the 10-day war, where a group of instructors took them to the field as platoons and trained them. They lived on the tanks and operated for 10 days out in the field. And it was called the 10-day war. So what we would do is we'd pick up 16 lieutenants and we'd put them on 4 tanks, and they would run and operate the tanks throughout the 10-day war. And then we would move them on to graduation. So we were out in the training area one day. I had the opportunity to be one of the first 2 M1 tank team leads, and I was team 3. The other one was Captain Jenkins, and I think he had team 2 was his team. But on that day, I was on one part of the field, and Captain Jenkins's element with his lieutenants were on another part of the training area. And I heard a radio conversation come in over, it was Captain Jenkins calling for an air medevac and a recovery vehicle. And there was just something in his voice, in the method in which he called, which perked up my ears and said, something's really wrong. This is not right. This is not a normal call. Although we had medevacs all the time, there was something different about this one. So I jumped in my Jeep, and it was an Army Jeep at the time. We didn't even have Hummers. And I drove to the site. Actually, my driver and I went to the site where the accident was. And upon arriving, what I had learned was that one of the M1 tanks had parked on the hill just prior to doing an after-action review, and the crew had bailed off. But just before they all got off the vehicle, one lieutenant was still inside the vehicle, one was on top of the vehicle. The brakes broke loose on the vehicle, and the M1 tank had rolled down the hill backwards and gone up over a road, and unbeknownst to us, there was a huge culvert, it was like 20 feet deep, like canyon next to the road. And the M1 rolled up, completely flipped upside down, and landed upside down in the ditch on top of the one lieutenant. The other lieutenant was still inside the vehicle, but the lieutenant who had stayed on top opted not to jump off and tried to ride it out, was now crushed underneath the vehicle. So when I arrived on the site, I scooted right down got down there and got down under the vehicle. And I think it was Staff Sergeant Robinson was down. He was down there and he was talking to the lieutenant because the lieutenant was conscious. And I'm going to show a picture here real quick. Here's a picture of an M1 tank, actually from that time. That's 3 Alpha there. My team assistant, Sergeant First Class, helping ground guide a tank as we're recovering the track off an M1 tank. So what we're seeing in this image is an M1 tank, and if you look and you see the 50 cal up above, the commander's weapon station, and right behind that, a camouflage net. And the lieutenant was trapped between the camouflage net and the commander's weapon station. The tank, of course, was upside down completely. But he was conscious and talking. But we knew, it was one of those moments when we knew our concern was that is the weight of the tank on him the only thing keeping him alive at this time. That's hard. But at that moment was, we have got to get this guy out from under the tank. And that means we need to act now. So right in this picture we were just looking at, there was an M88. So the M88 came on site to help in recovery with this. And it pulled in, and we ground guided it down to the site. As it came down the hill, it was so steep that the 88 lost traction and slid all the way down to the bottom of the hill. And this is one of those moments where you see in Hollywood where the car on the freeway, is coming at you. They slam on the brakes and the car stops just like inches in front of you. Well, that's what I had here. But in this case, I had a 58-ton vehicle barreling down on me, and it stopped less than 2 feet from me, from actually killing me outright, because I had no place to go. I was trapped at the side of the M1 tank. Not a good start to this recovery operation. So the next thing we did is we backed the 88 up, put the blade down, and then we put the boom up. Now I'm showing you a picture of an M88 with a boom up and it pulling the engine out of an M1 tank. But in this case, the boom was going to be used to lift this tank. But there was a problem. You see, the tank weighs 60 tons. Okay, that's a 60-ton tank. The boom is classified for 35 tons, for 35 tons. And the key ingredient is that when you hook onto the boom onto the tank, there's a D-ring that goes on there that connects to the tank and then to the boom and to the winch so that you can pull it up. The 88 crew normally has a 40-ton D-ring that's used for that. But on this day, they did not have one. The only D-ring they have was a 13-ton D-ring that is used to pull, to lift the hood on an M113 track vehicle. So they had a 13-ton D-ring and not the 40-ton. But we were in a pickle here. We were stuck. We had a soldier underneath the vehicle and delaying and waiting for them to go back to the post and find the part and come back out was a non-starter. So I had to make a decision at that point in time. Was connect the 13-ton D-ring, and we're going to lift this tank with that 13-ton. Now, here's what my calculations were. And as I was hooking this up, I had a little conversation with God at the time. And it wasn't a prayer. It wasn't asking for anything. It was one of those conversations where you're just going to speak out loud. And nobody heard me because the 88's engine was running. The air medevac had just landed. So nobody heard this conversation. But it kind of went like this. It was like, all right, God, here's what I'm thinking. 60-ton tank, upside down. The gun tube is over the back deck, and the engine is on the other side. That means the gun tube and the engine are on the other side of the tank. Most of the weight of this tank is on that end. So on 60 tons, I'm thinking a third of the weight is on the front end. So I got 20 tons of tank I've got to lift to bring it up to where we can get under there and get this young man out. So as I'm hooking up there, that's my conversation I'm having with God. And I'm saying, here's the thing. I'm looking at this 13-ton D-ring, and I'm going, that's American made. That is cold steel, made in America. And I bet the manufacturer exceeded expectations when he built that. I know it's classified as a 13-ton, but I bet you I can get 20 tons out of that D-ring because I think it's been made to exceed expectations. And I hooked it up. We stepped back and we raised that vehicle we raised it about 2 feet. And that gave us just enough room to slide in there. Now, we're hanging this 60-ton vehicle on the 13-ton D-ring. And we slide under there, and Sergeant Robinson goes right under the vehicle completely. And I was scared to death because I'll tell you what, my heart was beating because if that D-ring broke, he was dead. Boom, dead. And we grabbed the soldier, but we couldn't drag him because we knew he'd been crushed. So we had to move him onto the backboard. And then 4 of us pulled him out from under that vehicle and moved him over to the stretchers. And that left us with one dilemma left. There was a soldier, a lieutenant, still inside the vehicle. So we had to stand back and say, okay, we're going to continue this. We're going to lift this tank another 2 feet to give enough room for this lieutenant to slide out the loader's hatch and get to safety. So we yelled to him and said, you're going to come out of there like a ferret, man, coming out of the hole. you're going to need to move as fast as you can because we don't trust this D-ring. And sure enough, we raised it. He came out. We grabbed him, snatched him out, put the tank back down. And in the end, that lieutenant was okay, a couple bruises and scrapes. The other lieutenant had both legs broken and his pelvis broken, but he lived. And he can't continue on. If I remember right, he continued on and entered into the military service 6 months, maybe a year later after hospitalization. But the key thing for me was this D-ring. This D-ring had exceeded expectations. And after that, I in fact had a D-ring. I took the one that we used and we threw that away because I did not want anybody to ever lift anything off that D-ring again. But I got another one and I had it sitting on my desk for years. And that was there to remind me that whenever I was serving people, whenever I was working, one, to always go the extra mile, always carry just a little more weight, always add value at a higher level, and be prepared to always exceed expectation. And that's why it's part of my culture in my company. So whatever you're doing in your organization, think about that for a minute. Think about carrying just a little extra weight, going the extra mile, taking that extra step, and exceeding expectations. I'm Marshall Townsend with MT2 Leadership. Thanks for listening to my story today.